Hey friends, hello and welcome to my second video in my favorite books and/or series of all time series. We started with fantasy and now we've arrived at science fiction. I love science fiction not only because it allows us to expand our horizons and imagine what life might be like on other planets or on our planet if things were very different in the far future or in the near future, but that it is such a great way to really deeply analyze and critique our society, our political systems, our economic systems, our views of life and humanity. I love stories that look at what it means to be human and what kinds of life forms deserve full personhood rights. I love science fiction that takes a look at corruption and political and social upheaval and climate crises. I love it all. So in this video, I'm gonna go through my top 10 favorite science fiction standalones or series that I have ever read in my 32 years on this planet. And as I was going through all of the books I've read in my life and trying to pick out my favorite science fiction and rank them into a top 10, I came across so many gems that maybe aren't quite top 10 material, but are great enough that I really didn't want to leave them out. So just like with the fantasy video, I'm going to be making an extended part 2 of this video for my patrons, where I'm going to share more than 10 more series and standalones that I would recommend. So consider becoming a patron if you want all the bonus recommendations. You don't have to join at a particular tier level. All my patrons get access to these bonus recommendations. I should just quickly say, for anyone who's new to this channel, I am maybe not a typical sci-fi reader in that there is a lot of classic sci-fi I have not read yet. I do have plans to do so, but I read a lot more contemporary, new release science fiction and have always done. But also, I am not really a fan of the space battle action sci-fi. It's fine, I enjoy it occasionally when I'm in the mood for it, but it's usually not something that's going to end up getting 5 stars from me. So just keep that in mind. These might not be the picks that you expect from a top 10 sci-fi list, because they're probably not going to be the classics or the most well-known books and series that you might see on many lists like this. And maybe that makes it fun and interesting. I think so anyway. But of course, if I'm missing books on this list that you think I should definitely read, if there are classics or beloved series that I'm missing here that you think I should definitely check out, let me know in the comments. I am definitely going to be mining those comments for recommendations, so feel free to leave them liberally. I appreciate it. Okay, so number 10 on my list is a book that I did not expect to love as much as I did, and its prequel, and that book is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and its prequel, The Boy on the Bridge. These are zombie books, and I am not generally really a zombie person. They're fine. I watched Walking Dead for a few seasons, but zombies have never been my preferred trope when it comes to science fiction or when it comes to horror, depending on which it falls into. And these definitely straddle the line between science fiction and literary horror, but they just have so much more heart than I expected going into them. I thought it was going to be a little bit of a thrilling story of trying to, survive in a world infested by zombies, but it turned into so much more, really exploring the theme of what makes us human, what makes a monster, what makes a human, who deserves rights, who deserves to live, in a way that was so absolutely heartbreaking and beautiful. These characters are so well developed and their relationships are incredibly compelling and heartwarming, oddly sweet and wholesome for a book that is full of zombies and murder. It is just a beautiful duology. It has so much to say about what it means to be a person, what it means to be human, a celebration of differences and evolution, even if it's not in the direction we necessarily expected, and these just really beautiful connections and relationships between people, pretty much exclusively platonic relationships, really deep love and care. Both of these books have child protagonists, but even though the protagonists are young, these are not books for children. These are definitely firmly aimed at adults, but I felt like the children were so well written and so well captured. They're definitely precocious, very clever, hyper-intelligent children, but they do feel like real children to me anyway. And that was definitely a large part of the charm. I love when an author is able to balance child protagonists in a book that is not aimed at children. I think it's a difficult thing to do, and M.R. Carey did a great job in these. These books do have, some excitement and some thrilling moments and some near escapes and some violence violence and gore, but they also just have so much to say about what it means to be human. And that is truly one of my favorite themes for science fiction to explore. And M.R. Carey does such a great job of doing it in these books. Highly, highly recommend. They blew me away. Moving on to number 9 on my list, which is Sorrowland by Rivers Solomon. Rivers Solomon is quickly becoming a favorite author of mine. They tend to explore really dark themes, and so I do tend to need to take breaks, month-long breaks between reading their work, but every single time I have been absolutely blown away. And Sorrowland is definitely my favorite of all their work. This book is a little bit nebulous, a little hard to define. It's definitely vaguely speculative fiction. I am classifying it as science fiction, but some people might see it more as fantasy or more as weird lit or literary fiction with some speculative elements. I think all of those are fair, but I definitely knew I needed to talk about Sorrowland in this series in general because it's absolutely gorgeous and heartbreaking. In Sorrowland, we follow Vern, who is 7 months pregnant and escaping from the cult that she was raised in. And she's trying to survive in the wilderness and give birth and deprogram herself and find a way in the world without the system that she's grown up in, while also experiencing a physical transformation that is distressing and overwhelming and surreal. This book is really looking at systems of oppression and control and racism and what makes a monster and bodily autonomy and rebellion and the audacity of queer love, as the quote in the blurb puts it, which I just love so much. This book is really so unique and literary and biting in its commentary. This is metamorphosis and physical transformation as a metaphor for the deprogramming from a cult and growth, evolution, and evolving to the next stage to continue to survive, to protect her children in a cruel world that is just as likely to harm them as to help them. Though I am not a mother myself, I am absolutely fascinated by books that explore the experience of motherhood through a raw, vulnerable lens. And while this book is much more about Vern herself and her own experience, her life and her healing and her transformation, her motherhood is a vital piece of that, and I just find it to be a very fascinating perspective, and I really love how Rivers Solomon explored it in this book. Moving on to number 8 on my list, we have The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This is dystopian near-future sci-fi in the tradition of 1984 or Brave New World. This is a book that explores the importance of memory and the ability to control a population through language. It's harrowing and disturbing at times. It has a very unsettling, eerie tone to it, and there's something very destabilizing about the world and the way that this memory and language shifting occurs. There's also a secondary sort of story within a story in this book that is even more disturbing and eerie and strange and unsettling than the main story somehow, and it's just one of those books that I started reading and then I couldn't put it down for the life of me until I finished it. I was so engrossed, I was so immersed, I was so fascinated by the world and the themes and the way that it was exploring the power of language and vocabulary and the use of words to control and suppress ideas, which again, very reminiscent of 1984. This book was originally published in 1994 and only translated into English in 2019, but it's absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of dystopian science fiction. There is just something so menacing and driving and deeply unsettling about this work in a way that is absolutely thrilling and just so propulsive and immersive to read. Moving on to number 7 on my list, I initially gave this book 4 stars, but I went back and changed my rating to make it 5 stars about a year later because I realized I just kept thinking about this book. It has stayed with me more vividly than many books I have read in my life, and it's just such a unique fascinating concept, and it hasn't let me go since I read it, and that is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. This is from the iconic, famous, much-loved Area X trilogy, which has now become a quad because the fourth book came out recently. Here are the other books in the series. We have Authority and Acceptance, and then the new release, Absolution, which I will need to get to soon. And I'm specifically talking about the first book, Annihilation, here. While book 2 and 3 are interesting, and if you really enjoy book 1, I would recommend reading on in this series. At least I can vouch for book 2 and 3. They're not on the same level as book 1. In my opinion, they're definitely not as memorable and unsettling and compelling, but they are interesting and definitely worth the read. What I really want to talk about is book 1, Annihilation, because this is one of the weirdest books I've ever read, and that's saying a lot because I read a lot of weird lit. It's one of my favorite categories of books. This is just very hazy and dreamlike. It is deeply unsettling and full of tension and the ancestral fear of the unknown and unknowable. There are some really confounding elements to this story, but it's just so fascinating. It's a really immersive story with our protagonist, who is an unnamed biologist who is sent with a team into Area X to explore what is happening to this portion of the land, why it's transforming in the way it is, why people are being lost there, and why so many of the people who have gone to Area X come back, develop cancer, and succumb to their illness very rapidly. This is an ecological horror. It is all about the unknown and the monster that you can't quite make out, can't quite locate and see, but you feel them all around you. You can't see the monster, but they can see you. And because you can't see it, your imagination just runs wild and makes something much more terrifying than any real thing could be. Very mysterious, very strange, lots of psychological horror elements to it. And it does something that I love in sci-fi, which is allowing me to escape from my regular boring life into something strange and unknown and alien and unsettling, and just live there for a while, but then be able to close the book and go back to my regular, safe, boring day-to-day life where things make sense. There is a lot up for interpretation, and I love when a book trusts its reader enough to let them figure some of it out and let them determine a little bit of what the book is saying and what it means and what's happening, instead of trying to dictate every tiny detail to the reader and kind of control our reaction and our interpretation. Like I said, I do have to still read the fourth book that recently came out. I'm probably going to reread the original trilogy and then read book 4. Let me know if you want a reading vlog for that, just a review of the fourth book, or if you want me to do like a traditional reading vlog where I go through the first 3, reread them, and then read book 4, because that could be fun. Moving on to number 6 on my list, which is Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir and Harrow the Ninth. I haven't read Nona the Ninth yet because I am trying to hold out until we know the release date of the fourth book so that I can kind of spread this series out a little bit more and not have to wait a really long time between installments. But from what I have experienced reading Gideon the Ninth and Harrow the Ninth, I would highly recommend this series. This is another series that's kind of hard to define. I could easily understand why people would classify it as fantasy. To me, in my mind, this sits a little bit more on the science fiction side, but it's, you know, all nebulous within the speculative fiction realm. This takes place in a system of planets where necromancy is commonly practiced, and all the planets in this system have sent their nominee of their best necromancer and their necromancer's cavalier, who is like a sworn protector, a bodyguard, to this sort of neutral, separate planet in their system that has been a place of learning and keeping of secrets for a millennia, and they are meant to partake in education and training and a competition of sorts to select the best necromancer to become a new lictor, which is a special position awarded to certain necromancers that allows them to become within a select team of warriors, essentially, to this person that they see as a god. This is a nice blending of sort of a more lighthearted, slapstick almost comedy in the dialogue with this gothic, darker tone underneath. And the first book in particular, Gideon the Ninth, is a bit of a closed room mystery, which is really fun. And we have our protagonist Gideon, who is a badass female warrior who is forced to swear there to protect her nemesis, Harrow, and they despise each other with the entirety of their beings, and it's really fun to watch them have to live together and work together and find a way to function because they cannot stand each other. And they start to uncover the mysteries of this strange place and try to determine how they can win this competition and make Harrow the lictor. And then some of their fellow competitors start to drop dead, and it becomes a bit of a closed room mystery. They're trying to solve the murders, figure out why people keep dying, try to stay alive themselves, trying to win the competition. All kinds of things happening all at once. And there is a little bit of a dark, spooky, gothic vibe. There is a little bit of violence and gore, but there's also just, like I said, so much fun comedic banter and some really silly, lighthearted moments and a really lovely, compelling, growing relationship between Gideon and a variety of characters that she meets along the way. There's something very wholesome and endearing about Gideon. And book 2, Harrow the Ninth, focuses on Harrow, who is in her own right a really fascinating character. And I honestly would be really hard-pressed to pick a favorite between the two books because they are so different, but both really masterfully done. There's a lot of queer rep in these books, which I love. There are some just amazing female characters and a variety of types of female characters that are badass and incredible and super fun and interesting and are allowed to be villainous and terrible in a way that I really appreciated. Harrow the Ninth definitely has a much more melancholic tone than Gideon the Ninth, and also has a bit of a confusing, chaotic writing style, which took me a while to get into, but I did end up really appreciating. And there's just so much interesting development. There's so much wholesome content somehow, and there's death and destruction and blood and gore and weird necromancy magic, and also those sci-fi elements and a gothic dark tone and a bit of a mystery and lots of layered world building, and it's just lots of fun, to be honest. It is so much fun. Moving on to number 5 on my list, which is coming from one of my favorite authors of all time that I already talked about in my fantasy video, N.K. Jemisin. That is The City We Became, and this is book 1 in a duology. The second book is The World We Make, and I love these. I feel like these are not everyone's cup of tea, just like N.K. Jemisin's work in general, I think is maybe not everyone's cup of tea, but I absolutely eat up N.K. Jemisin's weird brain and the worlds that she makes, no pun intended. There is something so fascinating about her world building and the themes she explores through her work, and the characters she writes are always so real feeling. They are complex, they're layered, they are deeply flawed, they are broken a lot of times, but they have so much personality and they develop these really endearing, really compelling and beautiful relationships, especially a lot of very interesting platonic relationships. And these books are no different. I have sometimes seen this duology described as urban fantasy. In my mind, it is more sci-fi than it is fantasy, but in this version of our world, cities have a soul and can be literally personified by human beings who become connected to that city. And depending on the size of the city, it can either be one person who becomes the personification of that city, or in the case of New York City, it's 6 boroughs are being personified each by a different person. And there's a reason why the city has woken up and needs these personifications, because there is an existential threat to the survival of this gigantic city and all the people who live in it. There is a Lovecraftian horror that is looming and ready to gobble it up. And these unsuspecting random people who have been selected by the city and become part of the city have to figure out how to work together and harness this new power that they have found to protect New York City and keep it alive in face of this existential threat. And it's fantastic. I absolutely love it so much. I love these characters. They're amazing. I love reading a book where you come away feeling like the characters are actually your friends in real life. That's what I felt reading these. There's so much varied queer rep. There is racial diversity. There is so much here in terms of the themes and the exploration of the various ways that nefarious forces try to divide and conquer to make people afraid of those who are different from them, to create this uprising of fear and hatred and scapegoating of certain groups of people, and really focuses on the experience of queer people of color and having that intersectional experience of having hatred thrown your way for multiple aspects of your identity. These books are a little bit campy. They're very sharp-tongued in their commentary. They are heartwarming and wholesome while also being harrowing and deeply relevant to our current political climate, at least in North America. I feel like I'm Canadian, but we even see it happening here. There's so much extremism, there's so much division, there's so much hatred. And that's really what Jemisin is exploring in these books. It is how people who have something to gain will divide and conquer, try to create conflict and hatred where it doesn't need to exist, try to drive wedges between us, instead of allowing us to find community, to find the ways in which we're similar, the experiences that we share, so that we can stand together in solidarity and fight for our rights as citizens who deserve to exist and have bodily autonomy and healthcare and all kinds of, vital basic human rights. It is better for the people with power to maintain their power by trying to divide and conquer and turn us against each other. And that rhetoric of hatred is something that comes up so often in these books, and it is personified in such a gloriously evil, yet somehow weirdly endearing and charming villain that is a cosmic horror, but also personified as the most corporate middle-aged white lady, which is really funny to me. There's just something so funny, yet biting and genuinely transformative and powerful about these books, and that balance is something that N.K. Jemisin does so well. I love these books. I am such a huge fan. I know that they are not everyone's cup of tea, but I think they are amazing, and if you haven't tried them, please do. Moving on to number 4 on this list, which is ironically a series of 4 books, the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers, starting with The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and then moving on to A Closed and Common Orbit, Record of a Spaceborne Few, and The Galaxy and the Ground Within. I love all 4 of these, but I have a special soft spot for the first book, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. These books are all in the same world and have some characters crossing over from one book to another, but are not entirely dependent on each other or a chronological series that relies entirely on each other. They're sort of 4 separate standalones within this world that are connected by a thread here or a thread there, and I love them so much. This series is often described as cozy science fiction. It is not focused on the space battles and the violence as much as some other space operas might be. It is much more character driven, a lot slower, has a bit of a slice of life feeling to it often, and is really more focused on the character development and their relationships than it is on world-ending galactic politics. And that's what I like about it. I love the characters. There's so much diversity in these characters, different types of aliens with different cultures and backgrounds and religions and views on the world and understandings of gender and sexuality. Speaking of gender and sexuality, there's a lot of diversity in the queer representation in these books as well, which I absolutely love. And the world building is really fantastic. It feels very rich and elaborate and deep and also wide. It does feel like this is an entire universe full of different species and cultures and planets and systems. There is so much detail here and so much life, and these characters immediately grabbed my heart and never let go. Each book is special in its own way, and there is something sort of cozy and comforting about them. There is that element of found family, of finding where you belong, of acceptance and coming to terms with your own identity and finding people who will love and accept you for exactly who you are. And sometimes you just need that in the books you're reading. I do think these books explore some really interesting, more difficult themes. There is some exploration in this series of what makes a person and artificial intelligence, and at what point does an artificial intelligence become a life form and a person that has a right to live, which is just one of my favorite things for science fiction to explore. There are some really heartbreaking storylines throughout this series. There are some really gorgeous moments, and it just makes my heart happy, okay? Sometimes you might have noticed a trend if you've watched my videos for any length of time that I read a lot of books that are quite devastating. or harrowing or dark, and I like those books. I think that they have value. I feel like I learn a lot from those books, but I do sometimes need a bit of a moment to breathe and recover and recoup. And for that purpose, I really love to have some cozier books that I can rely on. And I feel like Becky Chambers has become an author like that for me, where I just know that her books are going to make me feel comforted, even as we explore some more difficult themes, that I'm always going to feel like I have a safe place to land. There is something really lovely and heartwarming about her characters and the world that she has built, and I just love it. I think it's fantastic. It's so interesting. I love all the different characters and their cultures and their ways of life, their religions, and the backstories of wars in their past and how they've impacted their people. It's so fascinating, and I love this series. If you haven't tried it, definitely check it out. Now we're getting into my top 3 favorites, and once we get up to this kind of area, the books are so neck and neck that they could be rearranged in any order and still be accurate, but this is the order that I mostly decided on. So number 3, my third favorite science fiction book of all time, is I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. This is a book that I read relatively recently, a few months ago, and it immediately went towards the very top of my list. This is near future dystopian fiction, climate destruction fiction, societal collapse fiction, not quite apocalyptic, but definitely social structures are falling apart. Our planet has changed, our climate has changed significantly, and social rules have sort of gone out the window, and certain individuals and companies have filled those power vacuums, and the president of the United States is illiterate and is pushing that literacy is evil or wrong, and it's just such an interesting book, not only because this felt like it could be our reality in 5 years' time if things go very wrong, but also because despite the devastation and the grief and the frustration of a world that is falling apart due to pure human stupidity and greed, we have a main character who is so endearing, who is just trying to survive and to find his own little pocket of peace in a world that is just chaos. And this book mostly takes place on a boat on the Great Lakes and sort of bouncing between the coasts of the US and Canada. It made me feel so many different feelings, from, heartwarming, really sweet moments that made me cry, happy tears, to moments that absolutely enraged me, like created a deep ancestral rage, especially at the primary villain of this story. It was heartbreaking and hopeful and devastating and quiet and peaceful and beautifully written, and I loved it so much. I love this book. I feel like I've talked about this so much since I read it in my sci-fi nominees for the Goodreads Choice Awards video, and then I brought it up again in my favorite books of 2024 video because it's just that good. This book is so beautiful. If you're a fan of literary science fiction, if you're a fan of near future, very near reality science fiction, a bit of a dystopian societal collapse, economic collapse, climate fiction, ecological destruction, but instead of focusing on the characters who are the big power players or, the chosen one who's gonna fix the world, we're focusing on a regular man who is forced out of his comfort zone against his will and has to find a new path. And it's a really beautiful journey, and I loved it. So I would highly recommend I Cheerfully Refuse. This is, a book that not everyone's going to consider science fiction. I could see a lot of people classifying this more as literary fiction, and they wouldn't be wrong. But to me, this is literary science fiction, and it's beautiful, and I would highly recommend. Moving on to number 2 on my list, which is a novella, and that is To Be Taught If Fortunate, also by Becky Chambers. This is not related to the Wayfarers series. This is a separate entity, a tiny little novella, and it's one of my favorite pieces of science fiction I have ever read in my life. I've read this twice, and I'm sure I will reread it many times to come. And we're following 4 astronauts on a long mission to explore distant planets in search of a planet that could suit human life. And they come across wildly different environments and face a variety of dangers, both from these environments and from the life forms they meet on these planets, but also from their own psychological distress from being away from Earth for so long and worrying about the state that Earth will be in children when they return, if they're able to. They have really compelling relationships. There's queerness in here, as I have come to expect from everything by Becky Chambers. These characters feel very real, and there is something sort of comforting and cozy about this, but it does have more of a literary and sort of bleak quality to it that the Wayfarers series doesn't for me. It is so beautiful. It is so well paced. The worlds that Becky Chambers has created in the planets that they visit are just mind-boggling. They are so unique and imaginative and vivid and immersive. I could think back and see so vividly in my mind's eye what these different planets look like, and some of them are terrifying and strange and dangerous, and some of them are equally strange but also absolutely magical and exciting and make you wish that you could explore and discover the universe. It is just such a lovely book. What we need as human beings, our basic needs to survive, our connection with our fellow human beings, the wonder of space and the universe and what it can be, all the multitudes of mysteries that it contains, the love of exploration and discovery and science, and what is our legacy? What do we leave behind? What are we willing to sacrifice for our fellow human beings on Earth? What are we here for? What is driving us to make that next discovery, and what really matters? I just think it's so beautiful. It is so short, but it has so much to say, and I think it's gorgeous, and it's one of my favorite sci-fi pieces of literature that I've ever read. And if you haven't read it and you've never read any Becky Chambers, maybe try this first, because it's not a big commitment. It's under 150 pages. It's a very quick read, but I feel like it's life-changing. So this is my number 2 favorite science fiction of all time. And that brings us to my absolute favorite science fiction series of all time. And you might know what this is going to be if you saw my favorite books of 2024 video, because this is The Parable of the Talents and The Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is similar to I Cheerfully Refuse. It is near future, dystopian sci-fi, climate, ecological destruction, societal collapse, power vacuums, and wildfires, and religious extremism, and growing hatred, and societal collapse, and social unrest. These books were written in the 90s, but they are set right now. And it is very unsettling and uncomfortable to read these books knowing that they are set right now and they are based on what Octavia E. Butler saw coming, looking at the way the world was going in the 90s. And while she may have seen things falling apart a little faster than they have in reality, she wasn't totally wrong. There is a lot here that she predicted that has come true. There is a lot of what happens in these books that is absolutely horrifying to read, that are only a few steps removed from what we are actually seeing right now in the modern United States. Power imbalances, kind of similar to the N.K. Jemisin series, looking at the ways that those in power will try to divide and conquer, try to rile up hatred and divide and conquer, rile up hatred, make us angry at each other so that we don't have enough camaraderie and we can't band together to fight against the system that is oppressing us all. And the protagonist of the series, Lauren Olamina, is building her own new religion that is based on this sort of science-forward understanding of community and working together and trying to build a way to the stars, essentially, to find a different place to live off of planet Earth, because Earth is just a lost cause at this point, and she is completely taken by her mission and by her belief in this being the most important thing that she could spend her life on amidst a world that is descending into absolute chaos and destruction. And these books explore some really dark, some really difficult themes. These books take a really hard look at religious extremism and the way that religion can be used to manipulate and control people and to again rile up this hatred and this fear. These books focus so much on survival and community and are really a cautionary tale of where we are going rapidly if we do not stop and take a step back and try to find community with each other and to focus on our basic human rights and compassion for each other and try to take care of the only earth we have, the only home we have. It's honestly incredibly upsetting to me to read these books and to realize that people could see where we were going in the 90s, or at least Octavia E. Butler could. And I mean, I know she was a genius, so maybe not everyone could see the future as clearly as she could, but I'm sure other people could see where we were going, and these books were published and people were reading them, and yet we still have ended up here. We are destroying ourselves as collateral damage in our rabid need to destroy the other, and we're ignoring the planet falling apart in the background, and there are only so many ways that can turn out. And these books explore one such way, and it is harrowing and horrifying and terrifying, and also, I think, such a poignant and relevant and important duology for people to read right now. I think it is a call to action, it is a cautionary tale, and I've said this before, but I really wish that the people who most need this book's message would be able to read it and actually absorb it. But unfortunately, I think the people who most need the message of this duology are too far gone to appreciate it, which is horrifying in its own right. So this duology sits in my top spot, favorite sci-fi of all time. And those are my top 10 favorite science fiction standalone or series that I've read in my entire lifetime. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found at least one new book or series to add to your TBR. If you did, let me know in the comments what you are interested in reading after watching this video. I always get excited hearing which of my recommendations y'all are considering taking on and checking out. It makes me excited for you to hopefully find a favorite, as I did when I read these books. Let me know, like I said earlier, if you have recommendations for me based on my favorites, if there are classics that I'm missing, favorites of yours that I haven't mentioned, or just other books that remind you of some of these that you think I should check out. Please give me your recommendations and tell me your favorites in the comments down below, because I would love to read even more amazing science fiction this year and forever. And like I said, I did have even more favorite sci-fi books that I wanted to talk about, but we're not going to fit in this video. So if you want to see the extended patron exclusive part 2, then join the Patreon with the link in the description box. We would love to have you in our little community over on Patreon and Discord. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Give it a like if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications if you want to see more of these favorites videos, because in 2 weeks' time, I will be sharing yet another genre-specific top 10 of all time video. I don't know what genre I'm gonna do next. Maybe horror, maybe literary fiction. We shall see. But turn on notifications if you don't want to miss any of these favorites videos. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.